So, hello guys. I hope that you can hear me well and see my screen as well. Welcome to my presentation. I will be introducing myself in a few seconds actually. But let's talk about game design. Yay! Game design is the best. So, in this presentation, we are going to talk about principles of game design that every indie must know. And oh, thank you. And this will be fun. I will give some advices that I've seen working on the industry for a while. So, for a brief introduction, my name is Bianca Nascimento. I'm a game designer. I work with game plan. Uh, my work is kind of cool because it's different from the studios. I work with a marketing way of game design, so I receive a lot of indie games that I can review and see the game design of them and give them advices and use game design with marketing to build a lot of cool products. I'm Brazilian, so I'm way too nervous in this to give this presentation. I'm always talking about game design. This is my first presentation in English, so please forgive me if I mistake something. If you don't understand something, feel free to ask. But I'm always talking here in Brazil and a lot of communities about game design, and this is one of the things that I'm most passionate of. And I love cute animals, and I love sparkles and cute things. And on my slides, you can see a little me and the cat that is my representation on game plan. So, let's do to the first two tips. They are not really game design, the first two, but they will help us through the rest of the presentation. And will be a brief presentation actually, around 25 minutes, and you can ask everything at the moment you want. And I will answer. Thank you. So, the first tip is the most harsh one. That is, your game isn't your child. And that hurts a lot. So, I receive a lot of games, a lot. And we often give them feedback. But the devs are always too sensitive about it. Like, oh no, that's bad because we want to be bad. We are going to fix it. We already know. Or no, you don't understand what this feature means. But when we give feedback as a consultant at game plan, we want your game to improve. And sometimes, yes, it hurts. And sometimes this feedback isn't well received. So you must learn how to receive that feedback in the way that you grow, both from devs itself and from the players. And that's the first lesson. Don't be too parenting about your game, because this will also prejudice on the marketing side. So if you're treating your game like a child, you often won't listen to what the player wants. So if the player gives some feedback like, I can climb this mountain, I can go through this challenge, I don't have any idea from where to go. If you're treating your game like a child, you just say, that's fine, it's my game and I like it that way, and you're just a bad player. But there are two ways that you can make a game. You can make the game that is your dream, the game of your life, the game you're most passionate about. But this game, that is an art game, will not sell well. Won't always sell well. You can expect to make a lot of money making something if you don't care about your player base. It's totally fine to make a game because you love it, to make a game because you want to express yourself. But isn't all the time that your game is going to sell well when you think that way. If you want to survive actually making games and make money, you need to think then as a product. And this is kind of hard to put on in these heads because they're so passionate about what they do, and that's perfect, perfect, that's awesome. But you also need to take a breath, hear feedbacks, and know that your game isn't your child, and this kind of thinking will just prejudice your selling and your development itself. So a lot of times when I give feedback, I receive these reactions, and these are not the reactions I want. I want to devs to cooperate with me. I want devs to say, okay, this is very important and I don't want to change, and then we can work through it. But if the dev gets so uh, gets sad about his reaction, it's hard to help. If he will just say, no, I don't want to change, or no, this is very important. We need to work together to make a great game. So please always listen to feedbacks, and always treat your game as a product if you want to. If you want to make a game for because you want to express yourself, that's perfect, fine. But maybe you won't sell that well. You won't sell many games, and that's fine if that's what you're aiming for. And here, our second tip that is really, really, really important is that your team needs a game designer. So this must sounds a little weird, like why am I talking about game design and this is one of the tips? And that's a great explanation. A lot of times we receive games, and when I'm playing, I think I'm sure that this team doesn't have a game design. And then you ask them and you will say, oh no, I'm the game designer. And the person who says this usually is the guy that had the idea, or the producer, or the artist that is the leader of the team. But being the leader of the team doesn't make you a game designer. And that may be a little worrying if you think, my god, but I'm a solo indie dev. What I'm supposed to do? I can make games. No, you can't. The point is, if you're aiming to do a good game design, you must study game design. So even if this is not what you like, this is not what you're good at, if you're making a game, someone on your team, and that can be you, your partner, or you can hire someone, or if you don't have any money and you're doing your game alone, it must be you. Someone has to study game design. So game design is a I often see people that are like, no, I'm game design because I played a lot of games. But playing a lot isn't what game design is about. It's about cognitive science, psychology, understanding gaming behaviors, and how to make your player feels good, how to make your player feel sensations. And that's not an easy job. So please, if you are in studio, you need a game designer. If you're a solo dev, you need to be a game designer. Even if you're not a great one, even if you don't read all the articles. And that's what this presentation is about. To give you a few tips and some directions to understand how the game design can help you, how the game design can help your game. And this is what game design work usually looks like. I'm always reading and I'm always frustrated and I'm always doing spreadsheets and documents. So if you're not feeling the sensations, please study a little bit more of game design and you sure will feel like this a lot of times. And here are our first actually game design tip, that is tell to the player what to do. So, but that's a secret because your player don't need to know that you're telling him what to do. It's kind of like being a mother. You need to tell your child what he or she needs to do. But when you tell a child what to do, they will usually say, no, I don't want to. So you can trick them into doing things. And that's exactly how making games work. So the player doesn't like to feel like they're being controlled by some divine force that in this case is the game designer. The player likes to explore and learn and feel empowered. But this is really hard to make, especially if you're giving him a lot of hints about what he needs to do, a lot of pop-up notifications, and hey, please click here right now. But if you don't provide him any direction, he will feel lost and he won't feel empowered by your game. He will feel sad. So that's a really thin line that we need to work on. And how do we do that? Well, that's mainly the onboarding of the game. So when you're presenting your game to a player, you need to teach him how to play, how to use the basic controllers, the basic movements. Usually we'll do this by the first step is to use controllers that the player is already familiarized with. So if you're making a platformer, you can use other platformers controllers unless your game has something really unique that will stop it, that won't allow it. But usually it's way better to use patternized controllers. So this is the first step to do so that the player will know what to do. And then you must teach him with him doing things. So as a platformer, that is a really simple and cool example. If you want your player to jump, you can put a pop-up notification saying, hey, jump now. But that won't feel great or empowering for the player. Now, if you have an obstacle that the player can jump and can provide some hints that that won't block his way, he will feel empowered because, hey, I can jump here. So what else can I do? What else can I explore? And that is also really important on the level design aspects of your game. So your player always needs to know what he needs to do. And he always needs to be sure about it. So show him paths using your level design. Make the paths that you want the player to go more attractive. Use lightning at your favor. Use a lot of things that will help the player to get through his path. And teach him what he is going to do, what he's supposed to do. And do not tell him, because then he'll feel powerful and empowered. And he'll feel like, yes, I beat this boss, yes, I'm beating this game without any help. But you're behind the scenes helping, and this is a really good feeling. Limbo is a game that do this, and even Limbo has its flaws. So Limbo has no words, no way to show you what to do on letters, but it shows how to do using the level itself. So it's a kind of trial and error experience. That's not always the best practice. It's not always good to use trial and error with your player. It must frustrate some players, but it worked on Limbo. So a lot of times doing game design is knowing what your game needs to go through, what are the emotions, the feelings that your game want to pass. So that's a great example. If your game isn't meant to be like that, you can add pop-ups, you can add a little context to the players that, hey, you can press this button. But it's always cool when the player can learn how the game works without relying on information, on text that's even more accessible. And here is an important, really, really, really important other tip, that is understand the game flow. So the flow is this theory created by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi that says that to be in a state of happiness, you must follow this chart. So the flow is this thing between the anxiety and the boredom. So what this means? It means that the player feels good when he has a challenge that isn't really hard, like way beyond his abilities, neither too boring, too easy for him. And that's a balance that is hard to get it. So I really it's really cool if you can study a little more and read more about the flow theory. It's a really important foundation for game design because we want the player to feel the flow. Because the state of flow is when the player is totally on the game. He's totally immersed. He's happy. He's provocative. So, if you play a child's game, for example, where you need to paint little balls with your finger, it will probably be too boring for you. But it won't be for a child. It will be challenge for it. So the child will be on this flow state, but you won't. At the same time, if you take a game and play on a save file that is on the last boss, but you never played the game before, you will feel that is so hard and you will be just so mad and stressed that will probably quit it. But the person that take it to the last boss will be on this flow state, hopefully, because the game teaches them to be more skilled. So as your player get more skilled on your game, so as he get more abilities, your game difficulty must follow this in a way that is never too hard or too easy. And that's a great, awesome principle of game design. Uh, I guess we are finally getting to the last ones, and I'm really happy because I'm on timing. I'm usually really a talking person. So, say the same things on different ways. And that's super important for accessibility and for game experience, for the player experience. And what I mean by this, I mean that your player always has to receive feedback. Always. Feedback is one of the most important things when you're doing the game design of your game. But if you're giving him a feedback for a really important action, as killing an enemy or finding a weak spot on a boss or finding something that is a secret, you can give just one type of feedback. And what I'm talking about with this type of feedbacks, you can usually show him visual feedbacks like blood and spilling, or you can use sound feedbacks like the sound of the enemies dying, or even haptic feedback when your controller will vibrate and you will literally feel that scene. There are a lot of ways to give the player feedback, but if he's performing an important action, you can rely on just one kind of feedback because the player may have some kind of disability. So having just one kind of feedback will make way harder for him to understand that his action was actually important. And because your player can just be so immersed on your game that one kind of feedback won't be enough to get his attention. So if you have a player with a health bars are a great example of this. And your player gets hit, he's damaged, and his health bar gets lower. But if this feedback is only on the health bar, the player will usually don't pay attention on it because its attention is on the center of the screen while the health bar is up there. So when your player gets damaged, he usually will say "huh." He will yell, or the controller will vibrate. You always use more than one type of feedback to help your player to understand what is important, what are going on, because gaming is an interactive experience. Is something that you do and you multitask a lot while gaming. So you are walking, you are taking damage, you are hitting enemies, you are stealth, you are doing a lot of things at the same time. So be sure to draw the attention of your players to the right parts. Here are two games that I personally think that do this well. So, Senua Hellblade Sacrifice, that is this first gift, relies a lot on sound, but you can play without sound. Won't be the same experience, but the feedbacks will be given in a lot of ways. And Celeste, which is one of my favorite games for all the time, gives a lot of feedback while you you're doing your jump. So here in this GIF, you have the words that say, "Hey, you can dash and jump," but at the same time, the environment tell you what you need to do. So right on this example, you can't not perform a dash plus a jump. You need to do this to get through this part. So that's also a way to provide feedback in more than one way. And I think this is our last tip, but you can feel free to ask me anything, any doubt that you have. Difficulty isn't the same as complexity. So what I mean for that? A lot of times when we are making the game, we are making level designs or even the main mechanics, we may think, hey, I want this to be a really hard game. I want my game to be the new Dark Souls. And that's what I'm aiming for. And that's absolutely alright. But what a lot of indie thinks is that difficulty is being complex. So a lot of times I hear that saying, hey, I need this. I want to challenge it my game to be more challenging. So you will add a skill tree every time that the player levels up, or something like that. But sometimes simple games can be as hard as the complex one. So Celeste is another great example where you only press like 3 or 4 buttons during your whole experience, but still a really hard game. Still a really challenging game because the game isn't challenging the player's cognitive skills, isn't challenging the motor skills of the player alone. The the level itself changes to challenge the player, not the ways that the player interacts with the game. So, not always a complex game will be hard or will be the best path to follow, especially if you're an indie, because you usually don't have a lot of money, and if you do, you have to allow the resources on a smart way. And doing complex games like with a lot of skills and a lot of sets and a lot of everything will be time consuming and resource consuming. So a lot of times it's really better to do a simple game that is hard than a complex one, because not every player will want a super complex game. Actually, it's really hard to make a complex game that isn't overwhelming for the player. And of course, RTSs, 4Xs are all exceptions because these are their niche. So this is a 100% rule. None of these are. Uh, Game design is about experimenting anyway, so you can always experiment new things and see what works for you. But these are foundations that usually works and are really good to build the player experience. So here I bring Dark Souls as an example. Isn't really a complex game. We can put some resources. You have a skill tree, but you only have a few buttons. You perform a few actions, and still a complex game. The game doesn't change itself or its mechanics to be hard. The level changes itself. The enemies change to make the game hard. And inside Super Mario are also good examples because Mario is a platformer and still is a challenging platformer. Isn't always easy, isn't always but it doesn't have a lot of buttons for you to push through. So if you can, and if that fits your game, go for simplicity. It will be cheaper for you to build and it will be better for you. And with this, I conclude our presentation. This is a really simple one with a few principles that I really hope that will help you with your game and with your game design, because game design is a really important part of being a dev, an indie dev, and I see that devs a lot of times doesn't care or think that this is just about playing a lot and placing some enemies on random places. But a good foundation on game design will make your game so much better that I want to share this knowledge with you. So, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me here. I will love to answer them, and I will be super glad to hear feedback. And if you want to talk to me but you are too shy or you want to talk about anything, you can reach me by email. That is bianca@gameplan.com.br. And I will be here just talking a lot, waiting if any question will pop up and feeling a bit silly. But glad because I made through it. So if you have any questions, please use the chat. Oh, thank you. That's so nice to hear. This is my first step to the world domination. That's always my goal to. Thank you, El Rafa Vas, I guess. And I hope one day I will just run over the world. So that's my my first step. Thank you, guys. Oh, I'm so flattered. I'm really happy that you guys enjoyed it. So I guess it's it. If you have any questions that you couldn't tell or you were too shy, please reach me through email. You can also follow me on Twitter to ask me about things. Is I'm putting the short Bianca verse because I'm not good at usernames. So you can follow me and ask me questions. And thank you guys for getting into my presentation. I'm really happy that I made it.